So with that said, for a bit of context, this is kind of a new webinar series that we're hosting. If you guys enjoy it, let me know. It's something that we would like to do, maybe monthly or every couple months. But kind of the premise of this is kind of based off of the old TV show, the whole home makeover series, where, we'd have people submit to us at Reviewer kind of like what their current scholarship processes look like, the tools that they're using, how they're managing their workflows, their different forms, what are their goals behind the program. And then we at Reviewer kind of review some of them. And then we're going to select a program to actually build and launch within the reviewer system and do kind of two main things. One is like from an operation perspective, how do we leverage our tools, to create a better experience for the participants as well as create operational efficiencies. But then number two is how do we start to layer on some of the best practices and emerging trends that we've started to see within the space to kind of take these programs and go one step further. So not just from a technological, platform perspective, but also more holistically. So so today we're going to kind of dive deeper into one of the groups we decided to move forward with, which is the Association of State Floodplain Managers. I'm going to give some really high level insights into kind of like what they currently do. I think what most of you are more interested in is how we translate those processes and workflows into reviewers specifically. The reason why we went this route is I think that their current kind of structure and process and some of the tools that they're using are very common. It's one of the most common ways that we see scholarships managed, using a combination of some offline tools and spreadsheets, but also using like your built-in web forms and tools like that in an attempt to create some operational efficiencies. I also really like the structure of their program because it's a renewable scholarship. So they actually ask these scholars to come back in the future to update their records and kind of release additional funds. And so it presents a lot of areas of opportunity. So at a very high level, it's one of your very standard associations, very focused on, community impact through kind of the different mission and vision that they serve, which is flood risk protection through communities. So for them specifically, they launched a program called the Future Leader Scholarship, which is an annual scholarship program serving undergraduate students pursuing a degree or an education path, obviously within their niche industry of engineering, planning, and biological sciences. Again, we'll kind of get deeper into like how they currently manage their program. As you can see, I've got quite a few tabs pulled up here to try to preview what they do, and then also kind of how that translates then into reviewer. And again, I'm going to move relatively quick through some of these just for the sake of your time today. But what I do like about their scholarship, and I'll kind of pause here and get a bit more deep into the weeds, is I think they do a really good job structuring their scholarship application process to get a really clear persona or a story behind who the scholars are. I think traditionally speaking, you have a lot of scholarship programs that are very metric driven. So tell us more about your financial needs analysis or academic performance. But in reality, no two people are created equal. And with some of these more competitive scholarship programs, you have to put your applicants in a position for success and allow them to differentiate themselves versus one another. And so I really like this model where they're kind of focusing on three core aspects to it. One of which is obviously academic achievements. So we want to know more about like your degree path, your current academic achievements that you've had, your test scores. Tell us a bit more about your extracurricular activities. Trying to build an academic persona about them. And then also, I love how they're also kind of doing some financial needs analysis, right? So getting a better understanding of income, what your expenses look like. And then for me specifically, the best thing about this scholarship, and I think they may have just joined. So I'm going to kind of backtrack here just a little bit. So if the team from the Association of Floodplain Management, if you guys want to jump on at all, please do just leave me a quick note. I'm happy to unmute myself and you can talk a bit more about your program. But I was just kind of talking through, I think, one of the core elements I love about your program, which is the comprehensive, I guess, snapshot that you're trying to get of your scholars. Again, the goal here is to help your scholarship applicants differentiate themselves from one another. You're going to have some people who are really high academic performers, some who are very focused on community development and volunteering, some who are incredibly gifted with personal storytelling, and you can't alienate one of those groups of people because of their metrics, right? So it's trying to build a comprehensive snapshot that kind of ties it all back in together. For me personally, as I design a scholarship process, I really focus heavily on personal storytelling, giving my applicants a voice to differentiate themselves through references as well as essay prompts. I'm also a huge advocate of videos, which we'll kind of get into here as well. So, at its core, I think from a pure design perspective, this scholarship knocked it out of the park, focusing on kind of those three core characteristics: academic achievements, financial viability, and then essays. We'll kind of get into some of the areas of opportunity. So from a current workflow perspective, and I'll toss a couple other tools in here, very, very common. So at least at Reviewer, when we go to design a scholarship experience, and I use that term quite a bit, which is experience, I focus on three key areas. What is the scholar or the applicant experience? Number two is from an operational perspective, like how are you going to be managing these programs? What does your experience look like? And then the third element to that is the review and selection experience, who for many of you are going to be volunteers. And so when we kind of backtrack and we start to develop and set up our systems to run these programs, if you look at it from an applicant's perspective, the more traditional old school model is physical paper being mailed into you, or it could be people, filling out fillable PDFs and they email it to you directly. Or where I think we sit with a lot of organizations, including this, is using some type of like online form tool. So they specifically are using SurveyMonkey, but from a workflow perspective, your Jot forms, your Google forms, your type forms, any of those tools are going to have a nearly identical process. So they have applicants coming in, they fill out the survey tool, they're telling us more about their personal information, their school details, academic insights, financial needs. They're also uploading multiple documents, which we are going to come back to. One of which is proof of citizenship or residency, a transcript, a FAFSA, as well as a resume. They're also collecting references, two specific references talking about two kind of separate things. And then they have two kind of essays. So I think from a structure perspective, it lowers the barrier for applicant success because it is online. With that said, it does pose a couple potential challenges. So first and foremost, using tools like SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, you name it, they're data collection tools. They're just that, they're forms. And so there's no real ability to save and log out. You are also restricted sometimes into the type of content that you're collecting. So when it comes to file uploads, at least with SurveyMonkey, generally you're limited to 15 megabytes, which 3 years ago was a good number. Nowadays, if you take a video on your iPhone, it's going to be 2 gigabytes or longer. It also poses challenges accessing those contents and those deliverables, which I'll also come back to. From an operation perspective, it's very hard for you to track what's going on. So it's human nature to procrastinate. It's very common for scholars to kind of start their journey. They want to look at the questions being asked from them. They desire to go work offline and then come back later. The problem with that is life happens and they don't. And so from an operation perspective, I think it's really important for you guys to have very clear visibility on, who's starting these processes, how far have they made it, send them reminder messages and things like that. When you're using like simple forms and data collection tools, you start to lose some of that capabilities. The other element that we're going to spend quite a bit more time on is the reference collection side of things. So one of the traditional challenges with references is a lot of times they want to submit it to you directly. Well, the challenge with a SurveyMonkey form or any online form is it's unilateral, right? So the person who's filling out the application is the one that adds the content. So what happens in that use case? Either the references have to send them directly to the applicant, and they upload it for them, which means that they're seeing content that potentially the references didn't want them to see. Number two is it kind of slows down the applicant themselves. They can't finish their application because they're waiting for the references to send it to them, right? So there's a chance that they actually may miss deadlines because of other people. Number three is if you want the references to send it to you directly, they can't actually attach it to the form, right? Because they're not the ones filling it out. So a lot of times you get a bunch of random emails sent to you. You don't know who they are, what it's for, and then you have to figure out how you're going to start to connect all the information together. So really briefly, you can kind of see this is the current kind of scholarship application on SurveyMonkey. So what they did is they built in kind of all the different dates, eligibility requirements. I think they did a really good job outlining the application and selection process. This is one thing that we weren't going to get into today. I call this a proof of process. So I've seen everything here at Reviewer. Unfortunately, I've also seen scholars who don't get selected and they have questions and concerns around why. They don't agree with the results. And it puts us in a really kind of risky situation from both a compliance perspective, but also a rocky relationship with our membership and our applicants. So the idea behind a proof of process is a very literal statement of, hey, when you apply to our scholarships, this is what your experience is going to look like. We're going to be requesting this information from you. These are our dates and deadlines. You're going to, go through some type of formal review process. Here's how you're going to be reviewed. Here's how we're going to ensure a fair, unbiased selection process. And the idea is by making that statement public, ideally you have all the tools in place that align with those different elements. So if the case does come up where people are asking about the results or kind of questioning it, you can kind of go back to the proof of process and actually prove that you followed that process. For those of you that are very interested in feedback sharing, we'll kind of get more into the system. It also creates the opportunity for you guys to share direct feedback to those that didn't get selected for some type of self-development, right? Obviously, they're going to go pursue scholarships elsewhere, ideally, and so they can kind of take the feedback from you guys and hopefully put themselves in a better position for success later on. So from there, you can kind of get into the form. So again, kind of with your surveys, you can kind of see that they're asking for multiple different file uploads, and then it gets right into the form itself. So we're asking for the applicant's information, their current schooling information, their address. This is academic or scholastic information, so kind of dates, grades, credit hours. It gets into volunteer or I guess extracurricular activities. We get deeper into financial expenses, and then of course all of your different file uploads. So because of the 16 megabyte limitation that there is with SurveyMonkey, they have one file per specific use case, which I think regardless is the right way to go. You want to kind of guide the applicants through an experience uploading direct deliverables for that specific use case. They do, however, have a separate section in here for the additional file uploads. So in theory, an applicant could bundle them all up together and then upload it directly. And then they do have kind of like an e-sign capability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of preview this here in Reviewer in just a second. Kind of moving on though, and I switched tabs too quickly. Kind of moving on to a couple other elements that I do want to look at is from an operation perspective. So again, using these built-in survey tools and web forms is absolutely a better applicant experience than if you were to have them fill out manual PDFs and email it to you. Where the biggest challenges come into play is then once the applications come in, what do you do with them? How do you manage from an operation perspective your dates and your deadlines? How do you manage communication? How do you actually view that content and view those deliverables? How do you take those scholarship applications and then share them with your team for some type of review and selection process? So a typical response would look like this. So this is SurveyMonkey. I, for fun, just added some dummy data just to kind of visualize it. But for those of you that use like your job forms and your Google Drive, it's going to be very, very similar. So basically what ends up happening is every applicant's or individual response kind of shows up as a line item. There's no concept of profiles. It's just kind of rudimentary, simple data. So you can kind of see I have one applicant here. And as I scroll across my page, here's all the content and deliverables that they submitted to us. If there was file uploads, I could also download them. So very quickly, you can kind of start to visualize that I can't really communicate with them. I can't do much with this. I can't set dates and deadlines. But more importantly is that there's no way for me to share this content in a digestible manner to my team or to my committees for some type of review and selection process. So what ends up happening is you come up here and you start to export and you download this information, and then you have to find a way to share it. So either you're going to go to like a Google Drive and create a bunch of folders per applicant. You may be emailing it to them. A lot of times they're sending them off like spreadsheets for them to log their comments and log their notes. From a data security and privacy perspective, we basically now moved everything out of a system into like other tools. And so obviously when we're collecting student information, FAFSA documentation, tax documentation, you have to be very careful how much hands-on we have with it and how we share that. Other kind of challenges I mentioned beforehand was those references, as well as kind of the file distribution. So then the last piece, and again, I do want to spend the bulk of today's conversation now actually visualizing what we did with this, is the review and selection. So if I am part of your review committee, I'm typically a volunteer. I personally have two small children, so I do this at like 10:30 at night on a Wednesday. And so to send me like a Google Drive link with a bunch of documents and files and spreadsheets and ask me to kind of sort through them, read them, offer my comments, offer my notes, and then send it back to you, it's just not something I have a whole lot of bandwidth for. And because I am a volunteer, obviously I want to put forth the effort. And there's concerns then around like the quality of my review and selection process, what I call volunteer fatigue and kind of burning them out. Also, from a data collection perspective, once those results come back to you, typically in a spreadsheet format or in another kind of survey or form tool, now you're downloading and exporting and recompiling. You're running formulas trying to justify the selections and the results. In this program specifically, there's two phases. So there's like the scholarship kind of review and selection process, and then the kind of committee narrows it down and they advance people onto an interview stage. So then you layer on additional complexities with the multi-phase process. So, with all that said, I mentioned before that when we design reviewer or scholarships within reviewer, we focus on three key things. What is the applicant experience? What is the administrative experience? And then what is the review and selection experience? So let's kind of jump right into what all of this looks like. There's a lot going on my page. I am recording this and we will be sending this back out. So you guys can kind of on your own time at your own pace, kind of run through like how we addressed each of these different kind of core components. One of which is going to be the scholar profile system. The other is going to be real-time doing eligibility checks, operational command centers, and then how you actually do your review and selection. I will spend more time on this as well. And it's the ongoing scholar management. So again, my goal today wasn't just to take this scholarship and kind of build it in reviewer, although we did that. It's also how do we layer on potentially, and this is optional, other aspects that can provide more value to the organization and then help you guys as scholarship providers actually measure the impact and ROI that you're having. And so for me, it's like once the scholarships are selected, we don't want our experience with them to end. Do we want them to come back and do acceptance forms? If it is a multi-year scholarship in years 2, 3, and 4, like how do we want the applicants to come back and submit the renewals? We don't want to leverage tools of technology and then in 2 years from now have all those individuals now working directly via your email inbox, right? Because now you got data disconnected in two different places. And then for me, one of the most exciting things is then how do we start to gather data from your scholars a year, 2 years, 3 years from now that actually measures how your scholarship funds change their lives and or the community. So let's now dive deeper into what we set up in Reviewer. So as you can kind of see right off the bat, there's a pretty dramatic change in their application process. So if I pull up their form, it's kind of one standalone page with a bunch of content and then all the form fields. So for me, from an applicant perspective, goal number one is lower their barrier. We don't want them interacting with tools. We want tools to interact with them. We want all of their time and all of their energy to be focused directly on creating the best version of their scholarship, putting them into a position for success. So we kind of created a simple landing page. The idea was to try to pull out some of those eligibility criteria and some of those kind of content out of the form to avoid too much scrolling and put it onto an actual like scholarship landing page. From there, the scholars can proceed on to creating a profile. I'm not going to go too deep into all of this just because you guys don't want me to spend a whole bunch of time typing. I do want to kind of call out though that this is the core kind of component to Reviewer, which is applicant profiles. So as we've discussed already, there are so many moving parts. You've got people, forms, files, communication, judging, and scoring. The only way that we can create operational efficiencies is to systematize that. So in this example here, we ask the applicant to very kind of quickly tell us who they are. And I'm going to try to type while I talk, which is a big challenge for me sometimes. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Again, what's going to end up happening is we're building a profile for the applicant and ongoing, any activities or elements that pertain to them now get stuck on their account. It also right away allows them to save. They can log out. They can come back later. It gives you that visibility that you have. Another thing that we implemented here was an eligibility check. So a lot of our scholarship providers spend a whole lot of time and energy vetting through scholarship applicants, first and foremost, just to see if they match the requirements for their program. Number two is from an applicant perspective, if they're not eligible, we don't want them to waste their time either applying for a program that they quite frankly can't achieve success in. So many of our clients will actually build in some type of evaluation criteria here that ask the applicants a series of questions. Now, behind the scenes, we're doing a direct lookup to the program requirements, and the system will either say, yes, you are eligible, you can proceed on, or no, you're not eligible, here's why. For those of you that offer multiple scholarships, you can actually go much deeper with this. It's a very powerful tool. You can also use it for scholarship matching. So if you offer 5 or 6 different scholarships, you can actually have the system ask them a series of questions and then not only check eligibility, but actually then from there say, hey, not only are you eligible, but these are the 3 or 4 scholarships that you're eligible for. Which of them do you want to apply for? From there, we start to get into the applicant experience. So for me, if we kind of go back to this example, and again, we are asking for the exact same information. It's more of just a style update. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to auto save as people go. Again, they can save, they can log out, they can come back later. But we also don't want to overwhelm them. It's very common for scholarship applicants to come here and kind of get overwhelmed with all the deliverables in their face. And that's when they kind of leave and they want to come back later to do it, but then they never actually do. So we try to break our forms into multiple steps or here or multiple components. I'm just going to really quickly breeze through here. I'm going to toss in some dummy data, so it won't actually be all that comprehensive. And again, you can kind of see if I wanted to leave, I could save, I could log out, I can come back later. We would then progress on in the forms. My email address is required. We then get into like the name of my school. We get into like academic achievements. Again, I'm just throwing in a bunch of test data here. But as you can kind of see, as I progress, everything is auto saving for me. So I have no risk of being locked out. We're asking for a website in here. Obviously, I'm going really quickly, so I don't have a website. I think there's one more website here. And then it gets into, I believe, our file uploads here after our financial needs analysis. So I'm just tossing in a few numbers here for us. But again, the goal here is that we are guiding the applicant through the experience as they go. Okay. So now we get into our file uploads. I'm probably going to pause here. I don't want to go too much further because I don't know if these are required or not. But again, with Reviewer, there are no limitations to file sizes. Better yet, and I am going to show this to you, every document gets embedded in Reviewer. So when I, as an admin or a review committee member, comes in to view the proof of citizenship, or if I want to look at their resume, I don't have to download it, export it, and go use other tools and come back later. I can physically view it directly in Reviewer side by side with all my other information. So I'm not going to add files. I am going to show you the form here in just a minute. So once these applications come in, instead of managing our program in a form like this, we now have dedicated scholarship dashboards. I am going to come back here to our references in a minute. In fact, I have an interactive tour pulled up just to help save us a little bit of time. So one of the kind of core components to Reviewer is our reference collection. And the way that this works is you can actually have applicants directly in the system put in like the name and email of who's going to submit their reference for them. Once they add their information, it can actually trigger a direct email to go to the reference. So in this case, David would have got an email saying, "Hey, David, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so." So we set that up for this example as well. And you can kind of see, I'm going to open up another one for us, that this is the email that that person would have received, right? So, hey, Virginia, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle. And the major difference here is that when I open this up, it brings me into a dedicated reference portal. So by no means do you have to ask your references to create an account. We just did that for this specific example. But once the reference kind of comes in, it drops them to a dedicated reference template. And all they need to do is answer a series of questions. So at Reviewer, we try to urge people away from doing reference letters. It makes sense. The challenge with a reference letter is its high barrier. So a lot of times the references are being asked at the very last minute. They have to come up with a letter from scratch. And it's a better reflection of the writing ability of their reference, not necessarily who they're writing the reference about. So in this example, we're actually asking the reference to rank the applicant on a series of qualities that they're looking for in a scholar. And then instead of saying, "Hey, write us a full letter," we're asking them to answer kind of three very short, 150 to 200 word essay prompts that then gets used in replace of the letter itself. Now, if you still want to have letters coming in, that's totally fine. But one of the main goals here is that when your team goes to review a scholar, when you read the references, all the content is very kind of consistent amongst everybody. So you're comparing apples to apples. And this will make more sense here when I show this to you on the back end. So where we kind of take over is the admin experience. So right off the bat, I can track my dates and deadlines. I can track kind of where everybody is at in every stage of the scholarship lifecycle, as well as review any recent activity that we have. So communication, comments that were left, etc. I'm a huge advocate of tracking progress percentages, and we do this in a couple different ways. So we can track in real time, the number of submitted entries we received, how many people started but haven't finished, and then of course who those people are. So what we can do is we can either send email template reminders to the incomplete scholars, or better yet, we can automate that. So every 5 days, send a reminder message until they're complete. You'll also see off to the right, we've got a section called supplemental forms. And one of them are those references. So the system will actually show you how many outstanding references were requested. Are they done or not done? And if they're not done, you can also send them reminders as well. We actually implemented three other things that I think weren't part of the initial process here. One of which is an acceptance form. So for every scholar who gets selected, they can actually come back and answer an acceptance form. So where the funds are going to be dispersed to, reporting timelines, et cetera. We're asking for a year 2 renewal form. So in this case, if you are selected for a scholar, you actually come back to reviewer, whenever it's time to renew your scholarship, answer those questions directly. And then we also implemented a pretty powerful ongoing report. So this could be done post-graduation. It could be done, 2 years from now. That timeline's up to you guys. But the idea is that the scholar can very easily come back into their account, answer a few questions, such as, how much student loan debt did you graduate with? Tell us more about how the scholarship changed your life. All these kind of really impactful testimonials that your team can then use to start to build a case for how you measure your own ROI and the impact that you're having on your scholars. So right off the bat, we have this whole new dashboard. When I go to view my scholarship applicants, I just jump over to my submissions. And again, to visualize the main difference in your online survey tools, your Google Forms, your Jot Forms, it's basically like a built-in spreadsheet. So you basically have a row per person, and then all of their data shows up here. In Reviewer, we treat them as people because that's what they are. So I get a menu of every single submitted scholar. If I click on, say, for example, Happy's name here, you can view Happy's entire profile. So in the center of my page is obviously the content we collected from he or she. So we have Happy's information, we have his grades and all the academic achievements, we have all of our financial expenses and incomes, we have our extracurricular activities. We've got all four of our file uploads, our birth certificate, our transcript, our resume, and our FAFSA. And then, of course, we have all of our essay prompts. So everything is systematically kind of put onto one central page. From here, I can also leave questions and comments. So if I want to directly message Happy, I could leave a comment right here. This gets sent to him via an email, and we can actually one-to-one directly communicate. I can also log internal notes. So maybe, for example, Happy doesn't quite meet this year's minimum GPA, but we want to put them in like a holding pattern just in case we want to consider them later on. I could leave an internal note saying, put in our holding for dropouts. And again, these are kind of made up examples. I can leave that note, and then whenever I pull Happy's profile, I can see any notes that I left from he or she. When it comes to the file uploads, every one of those documents shows up in this list. So you can kind of see I have a birth certificate, FAFSA, resume, you name it. And then when I press view, it'll actually embed that document directly in front of me. So I never have to download and export the transcripts or download the resumes. I can simply just view it directly in Reviewer. Same concept goes for photos and videos. This might take a couple seconds to load because it's a large image, but we have Happy's birth certificate. We also did a video essay where if I press view, it actually plays the video directly in the system. Once this person's been reviewed, I can go to the evaluations and I can see, hey, we had 4 different people review Happy. Here's the scores that they gave. And if I press view, it'll actually show me the evaluation that was submitted on behalf of Happy. And then lastly are those supplemental forms. So you can kind of see here, I already filled this one out for us, but I've got 2 reference letters. I've got one from Virginia and one from Professor Barker. When I press view on Virginia, you'll see the exact reference that she filled out. So she ranked each of these qualities on a scale from 1 to 5, and then she answered these short form essay prompts about them. Here is your scholarship acceptance packet. So from an applicant's perspective, if we kind of jump way ahead, if Happy was selected for a scholarship, he or she could just jump in here, click edit, and then fill out your acceptance form, right? So I can tell us more about the institution that, the funds are going to be dispersed to, instructions, I can do an e-sign, all that kind of stuff directly on his profile. Again, once this gets submitted, it's actually going to embed itself directly on his or her account. So all of the records get logged on their page. The next thing I want to look at is those review workflows. And again, I'm trying to run through, I think, where we can provide a ton of value here relatively quickly. So if I go to my groups, I mentioned beforehand, and I'm actually going to log out real fast and come right back in. because I logged in as a judge here a second ago on accident. So bear with me here as I log back in for everybody. The idea with this specific example is that it's a two-part review process. So part number one is an initial review of the scholarship information, and then those that kind of get selected for the next phase get moved on to an interview. And so the idea is to kind of build a judging structure where you can have kind of judging happening at a group by group basis. You can then generate the results, and then once the results are generated, you can then advance people as they progress forward. So if I open this program back up here and I go to my groups, you'll see that I created two of them. I got a phase one, which is the scholarship review, and then a phase two, which is my interview phase. Now, why this works really well is this allows you to have kind of dedicated teams or committees in charge of reviewing those different stages. So whenever kind of Stella, Shooter, Gary, Bob, Virginia come into reviewer, they can review phase one. Whenever Bruce, Tony, and Grandma Gilmore come in, they are reviewing the interview phase. So it's a way for you to A, categorize your scholarship applications, B, progress them from one stage to the next, and then C, start to assign them out to your team for some type of review and selection. For those of you that have multiple scholarships, you can layer this on. So you might have a bucket called, scholarship one, scholarship two, scholarship three, and then underneath those is phase one, phase two, phase three. One thing I'd also set up here is in the phase one scholarship review, I can open this up and it actually shows me a listing of all of our scholars. So Annie through Vito. It then shows me exactly who from my team is in charge of reviewing them. So one thing I try to be very cognitive of is not overwhelming my review team. I don't necessarily want my team to review every single scholarship application because they don't have the bandwidth to do that. Obviously, we have a bunch of test data here, but the idea was to try to create a very equal, fair judging process. So what we did is we actually bulk selected all of our applicants. We then went to auto assign and we said, hey, I want every applicant to be reviewed two times, no more, no less. And then what the system did is it actually assigned two evaluators per submission. And it does it equally and randomly. So if I jump over to my review team listing, you can see I've got a team of what, 8 or so people. Each one was equally given roughly 3 to 4 submissions. So when Stella logs in, she reviews these people. When Chubbs logs in, he reviews these people. If you ever wanted to override this, so for example, like maybe in this case, Happy got 8 of them, I did that personally. I could check individual applicants and say, well, there's a conflict of interest here. So I'm going to actually manually assign this, and I'm going to unchoose Bob's name, and I'm going to set the assignments, and it actually would remove Bob from his list. So it's very powerful, giving one-to-one direct capability of pairing up individual reviewers with applicants. So again, this virtually replaces all of this because in SurveyMonkey, you're downloading all this into a spreadsheet, and then you have to some way assign this to your team for review. Typically, you're going to send them files, spreadsheets, you name it. In Reviewer now, what I can do is I can go over to my review team, and if I log in, say, for example, as Chubbs, he has all this information shared with him directly in Reviewer. So we have instructions at the top, we got some helpful attachments for them, and then they get a simple list of who these scholars are. In the sake of time, we started to redact this. So that's another kind of best practice here is that we want to, if there's any content that potentially could alter the perception from your committees, we want to hide it from their point of view. So name, demographic details, addresses, things like that. So as you can see here, as a reviewer, I have no idea who these scholars are. I have an ID number, but I don't know their name. I don't know their demographic details. This one hasn't yet been scored, so I'm going to go ahead and just open it up. And you're going to notice that when your review team goes to evaluate a submission, they get a split screen. So half of the page on the left is their profile. So I have their entire submission form. I have all of their file uploads, which again, if I press view, it will embed itself directly in Reviewer. So I, as an evaluator, never have to physically leave the system. I can view notes that were left. I can leave questions and comments to you guys. And if I wanted to check out those references, I could do so. So if I wanted to review this top reference, I just simply press view, and then there's the content that was filled out. Off to the right is your scorecard. So when we implement scorecards at Reviewer, we kind of mimicked obviously the scorecard that's being used in this example. We try to avoid making your review team offer point values. So it's very easy to say, hey, rank this applicant's participation in extracurricular activities on a scale from 1 to 20, or rank their involvement in community service on a scale from 1 to 15. The challenge with that is they have a very tough time differentiating like a 14 versus a 15. And it seems like a small thing, but when you start to run averages, your team is going to have no idea, or they're not going to have any idea like what the difference between those two is, and they get bogged down in the values. So instead, we're trying to offer like an emotional response. So instead of saying on a scale from 1 to 20, rank their scholastic achievements, I can either say it's below average or above average. Now, as I scroll to the bottom, you will see that there is a rubric, right? So there are point values assigned to these different factors. And then once they submit this, boom, they just move on to the next in real time. So it's very quickly and very easy for the review team to side by side toggle back and forth from their file uploads to their form, leave their comments while filling out their score sheets. Once the review team is done, gone are the days of them having to send you a bunch of spreadsheets with the results that you then have to tabularize. So when I come back into reviewer, what I can do, let's go back to my admin account here, is I can run up to my results list. And what I can do is I can filter by my phase one scholarship review, and I can see in real time a list of literally every single scholarship applicant. I can see the individuals or teams that review them, and then how they scored either individually, collectively, or totals. And so many times our clients will just use this math. And I think in this specific example, they're going to take like the top number of people and move them to an interview phase. So what I could do is say, hey, the math tells me that these are my top 5 or top 10. I can simply select them from this list. And at the bottom, I can then advance them to the interview stage. So I would choose interview stage, and it just progresses them on step by step by step. A lot of our clients also use this page for deliberation purposes. So we at Reviewer don't make decisions for you. We just want to give you the data to make your own decisions. So your team might actually pull this up in a committee meeting and say, hey, here's the results. And then as you kind of look at this, you might say, well, there's a really compelling case for happy. So you can click view. It'll actually pull his profile. You can jump up to the evaluations, and then you can kind of let your team talk about the results. And it's a really good example because you can kind of see that the results were pretty consistent. Almost everybody gave 29s to 30, but Bob gave it an 18. So then you can kind of pull this up, and then your team can kind of talk about, well, like, Bob, why did you score an 18? And then off to the right, you can actually view the scorecard that Bob filled out. I'm going to go back here because there's another kind of cool thing that's happening. So what you might be asking yourself then is, well, did Bob just score happy low? Or what if Bob on average never scores higher than like a 20? So by his or her own standards, he scored happy really, really well, but this applicant's now being penalized for it. So one of the cool things I'm going to show you is what I call result normalization. So here's kind of a sample of it. Again, using an interactive tour just to save you guys a bunch of time. But this report basically shows you on a per applicant basis how your judges score on a per question basis. Jumping way ahead, what you really care about is this green section. And this is going to be your individual judging tendencies. So this shows us each individual judge's average score. So Judge Judy on average scores about a 24, but Tony scores on average about a 34. There's a 10-point swing between those two people. So if I, as Kyle the scholar, was reviewed by Judge Judy, I inherently am being penalized for it. So not only does this report help give you visibility on like individual judging tendencies from your team, but it also then starts to normalize it for you. So what it says is, you know what? I really don't care if you were scored a 24 by Judge Judy or a 34 by Tony. What you were really scored was average. And so if I got scored a 29, I scored a 1.15, which is, almost 15% higher than average. If I was scored a 16, I was scored like a 0.9, which is 10% lower than average. And then what this report does is it compares individual averages to one another. So it completely normalizes the results, taking into consideration personal judging tendencies. So I'm going to jump back over to kind of some of the other elements I have here, just to make sure I kind of covered everything. So, we kind of ran through the applicant experience, replacing the survey tools. We ran through some of the operation stuff. We ran through the references, the eligibility check, and then the built-in scoring. As I'm waiting for questions to come in, I do want to kind of go back and revisit, though, the ongoing data collection. So again, Happy in this case might have been selected for a scholar. If I go back to my supplemental forms, in year two, he or she just comes in and then would edit the renewal form, which basically would be the re-renewal of the scholarship. And then from there, kind of go off into its own workflow. So where this becomes really powerful is now you're managing kind of two distinct workflows. You have all of your net new scholars who are applying, going through their selection, and then you also have all of your renewal scholarships, that you're auditing, vetting their content, and going through their selections. Gives you complete visibility into who's at each one of those individual stages. Are they done or not done? You can send the reminders, and then of course execute the action items. The other thing that we implemented that I didn't see in the initial example was the ongoing reporting. So as a scholarship provider, I always want to look at ourselves and say, how are we actually changing people's lives? And is our scholarship program providing an ROI? So Happy, 2 years from now, wherever that timeline is, could actually come back and then fill out like an ongoing report. So it's going to ask us more about like your employment and your career development. How did your scholarship change your life? All this really impactful stuff. Because this is being logged on his profile, you can start to generate reports that compare these results to one another. So, bigger picture, you guys could build this narrative that says, hey, those that go through our scholarship program graduate with X% less student loan debt, X%, get jobs in this specific career field. Here's how they're impacting their communities. You can start to measure that, on average, their starting salaries are 10% higher than the industry average. All this really powerful data that you need to not only justify your program, but as you fundraise or work with donors, building these really impactful statements to increase your funding as well. You guys can build and launch as many forms as you want. I'm going to jump back over here to our actual program. But the forms are pretty powerful. Basically, you can create as many pages as you want, and then within each page is all of your form questions. So you can kind of reorganize them, you can edit them, you can drag and drop. If you ever want to add questions as you're launching your own forms, it's really as simple as adding a question, picking the question type. When we do that, the system will actually show you a visual example of it as well as a description. So it makes it very simple for you guys to kind of figure out what questions you want to ask and then kind of add them to the forms. From an email perspective, we have a robust email template tool. So you guys can basically build as many of these email templates as you want. They're all rich text. So you can kind of give it a from name. You can build out the email content. And then when you're ready to go to actually use your emails, if I go back to my list of submissions and say, for example, I want to send a bulk email to everybody, I could just simply go under my bulk actions, click email submitters, and then you can actually either send them a one-off email or you could pick from an email template. So it asks you what email you want to send them, and then boom, you can kind of send it off. Right now, on my screen, I've got pulled up the applicant profile. So again, gone are the days of having like individual submissions coming in. It actually builds comprehensive profiles on a per person basis. So I can view their attachments, activity logs, I can view all their content, leave comments, leave questions, leave notes, you name it. Question came in about like during the review process, if somebody gets sick or unfortunately can't finish the reviewing, is there a way for a judge that can replace it? Yeah. So great question. So if I go over to my groupings here, this is again kind of where we structure our review and selection process. And actually, before I go there, under your results tab, it does show you activity. So I can kind of see here that Bruiser here was scored by both Gary and Grandma Gilmore. However, Grandma didn't do anything. She hasn't even started yet. There's additional reporting that actually shows you on a per reviewer basis, like what's their activity. So have they logged in, yes or no? When they last logged in, and then like out of the submissions assigned to them, how many are done, not done. So ideally, you can kind of get ahead of that and track their progress. You can send them reminders. But if, say, for example, like Grandma Gilmore doesn't fulfill her obligation, what you can simply do is go up to your groupings here. We're going to edit the phase one because that's where she is. I can grab her name and then I can unassign them from her name or I can reassign them back out to other people, right? So this is where you can start to check or uncheck which submissions are assigned to who. There's another way to conduct reviews in our system. It's called a judge queue. And it's a new feature that I'm actually super a big proponent of. And what this basically does is it takes every single scholarship application. So instead of Annie being scored by two people, or let me rephrase that, instead of Stella being assigned to three people, it actually assigns every scholarship application to every potential reviewer. However, what you do is you set a threshold. So you'd say, I want every one of my scholars over here to be reviewed 5 times, no more, no less. So then when the review team comes in, each one of them gets a random list of submissions because otherwise they're going to work off the list top to down. The same reviewers review the same applicants. And they can review as many or as few as they want. Once that submission has been scored 5 times, or whatever that threshold is, it then falls off that list. So what that means is that if you've got some reviewers who are kind of, very ambitious and they want to score a bunch of people, they can do that. If you've got some reviewers who unfortunately had things come up and they couldn't fulfill their obligations, it's okay because that means when another reviewer comes in, if that submission still needs scored, it still shows up for them. And it kind of just makes sure that obviously every submission gets scored the same number of times, but it allows the reviewers to work at their own pace and score as many or as few as they want. Question came in is that is the next step for those that submitted a review of our program. Um, might need some additional clarity on what that question is. I can kind of talk a little bit about that while you clarify. So basically what happens is, the submissions come in, you have all of your operational tools, you assign them to your team for review. Once the reviews come in, again, you can kind of track the results in real time. What the next step is largely dependent upon your desired workflow. So this might be the results. Otherwise, you might do deliberations. If it's a multi-phase program, again, you can kind of select those that you want to advance on and kind of rinse and repeat that process until you have your selected recipients. So in this example, they actually advance people to an interview phase. Once that's been done, then you have to start to figure out like what are the next steps. So say I want to award 5 scholarships, I can kind of select those that I'm going to award. From here, I can kind of select them and mark them as recipients. And then from there, it's very custom. So you can log, how much you're going to fund them for. You can obviously we don't do fund disbursement, but we can kind of log all that information in the system. And then say, for example, Happy was awarded a $5,000 scholarship. That's when he or she would actually come back into their account and then go to their action steps. And they would fill out their scholarship acceptance form. And then once that comes in, then you move on to the next phase and then the next phase, and you kind of build in the entire life cycle of the scholar in the system.